Welcome to the Education Insights Focus on Behavior podcast. We're here to talk about all things behavior in the world of education. We take the science of behavior and break it down for educators into easily implementable steps, and we're excited to spend some time with you. Get ready to talk through behavior, what works, what doesn't work, and how we can all improve our work in schools so we as educators can be more fulfilled and our students can be more successful.
Hello, and welcome again to Education Insights Focus on Behavior. I'm your host, Dr. Selena Layden, and I'm joined by my co-host, Daniel Irwin. Hey, Daniel.
Hello.
And Dr. Daria Loria Barston. Hi, Daria.
Hi, everyone.
And of course, we're also joined by our producer, Emily Muse. Hi, Emily.
Hello.
All right, so I thought it might be kind of fun today to open up with a conversation around signs that we see around our everyday life. So just signs that we see that you have to maybe scratch your head a little bit and think, why does that sign need to be there? So any examples that pop in your mind? And I have a few too. So
this is one of my favorite rabbit holes to go down on the good old internet because I appreciate a sign that either makes you wonder what has occurred, what's the story behind it that the sign needs to be put up, such as the sign that I'm looking at that says, "Do not breathe underwater," or it just makes me wonder what exactly was the intention and what were people trying to communicate when they put up a sign such as, here's another brilliant example for you, is garbage only, no trash. So riddle me that. If you as listeners have suggestions and ideas, let us know. But I think that if you wanted to spend a few minutes of just exploring and Googling some different signs that make no sense, you would be pleasantly surprised. Daniel, do you have any suggestions? Do you have any examples?
I have kind of an example, and I don't love the phraseology, if that's even the right word, of the sentiment on the sign, but we're going to talk about it from a behavioral standpoint. And I saw it when I was at a house in the Smoky Mountains, and they had like the outside trash cans, and it said there's considerable overlap between the intelligence of the smartest bears and the dumbest humans. And so they were bear-proof trash cans, and this was like, please use these because bears will come and eat your trash. And I think that's not how it wouldn't look as good on a sign, but the idea being like, we're humans, we want convenience. It's kind of a pain to do this latch, that latch, put your trash in, undo the thing again. Whereas bears, while they may not have the same intelligence as us, their tenacity to get to food will outweigh that. And so the sign conveyed a message to like, please use the trash cans appropriately, so you don't get bears. But I didn't love the wording. You know what I'm saying? So clearly there was issues with bears getting into people's trash and people not using the trash cans correctly.
sometimes I wonder, like, who uses this sign, right? Like, who needed this? Like, for example, one of the ones, and actually there's one not terribly far from where I live that says something to this effect. But, it's basically talking about the road will flood. And so it'll say, when road is underwater, don't use it, essentially. And I'm like, but when the road's underwater, the sign is underwater. And then you can't read the sign that says don't use the road. Now, admittedly, I'm hoping people will not drive on a flooded road, right? Even a small amount of water on a road can move your car. So you should not do that. But I laugh about like, but then the sign isn't there. And so, like, who are we talking to at this moment?
Talking to the merman.
We have
There's
plenty
also a
of those.
sign. It's not really, and it's a sign for a creek. It's called Rattlesnake Creek. And then right under the sign, it says no rattlesnakes. And that's one of my favorite signs. I mean, I don't know how they're guaranteeing there's no rattlesnakes all the time, but I love it. It's one of my favorite signs.
Do we have a lot of rattlesnakes in Virginia?
They're in the mountainous areas, I believe.
Okay. I know
But
we have like
maybe-
copperheads, but
But
Yeah.
if you're not sure, that's a very comforting sign. I appreciate the clarity and the clarification of that sign.
I also laugh about sometimes the placement of signs. And I know that this is an old joke, but it is funny to me when they're like Animal Crossing on a highway and it's like right here, this is where they cross. And I understand it's a range, but like, what if they cross before the sign and then you didn't see the sign?
What if a rattlesnake moves into Rattlesnake Creek?
They'll have to change the sign.
I have to get a new sign. It's unsustainable.
So you may be wondering why in the world we're talking about this. I will admit, I actually really enjoy seeing funny signs, and have been known to take pictures of random funny signs over time, that I will use for various reasons. But this does have a purpose today. So actually, what we're talking about is prompting, and prompting how to use it effectively, how and when not to use it. And so we'll kind of jump in and I guess start with the obvious question of what is prompting?
I'm glad you asked that question, Selena. And, it's very simply, prompting is a technique that provides hints or cues or support that can help guide a learner as they're developing new skills to be successful. And so we use them all the time. I think knowingly or unknowingly, obviously or not so obviously, we're constantly prompting people to do things, right? And so when we think about providing that kind of support and prompting to learners, the way we fade them and the way we use them will change the way they learn, how quickly they develop independence. And ultimately, we kind of fade ourselves out as prompts and whatever. We're going to talk about that today. But it's really just stuff that is added to this little learning equation that helps people get to the right place.
So if I may jump in here, Daniel,
Please,
well
Daria.
done. Well done. Thank you for the detailed explanation of what prompting is. I would add that it is intended to be a temporary support. So it's a temporary support that helps a learner perform a response at the moment.
Yes, and it is different from a direction. So I think sometimes there's a confusion there of, well, I gave you a direction. Directions are not prompts. Directions tell you so what to do. Prompts come either with or after the direction to help us perform that skill to a desired level. So I think between the three of us, we got the definition in there somewhere. So
Sometimes you can do things really well without necessarily concisely
it's okay. It doesn't
explaining
have to be
them.
concise.
Defining them,
Just
yes,
want to make sure it's
yes.
clear.
Right? Like it's they're two different skills and two different behaviors.
All right.
Just
Daniel, did you need a prompt to define prompting? But
I did use a visual prompt, yes. Thank you.
So if that's what prompting is, we talked about this a little bit already, but why do we use prompting?
Prompts are important because different folks learn in a different rate, in a different way, with different preferences. And we as educators need to make sure that we are providing the supports that students need in the moment, with it kind of being the Goldilocks support, right? We don't want to provide a support that is too much and that students become reliant on it, but we don't want to provide so little support that students don't experience that success. And so there is a hierarchy of prompts, and while different researchers will debate about whether gestural or verbal comes first, but the idea is that there are visual prompts, there are gestural prompts, there are verbal prompts, and there are partial physical or physical prompts. There is a place and a time for each prompt, but that is determined by the learner and their needs. And so we need to make sure we're providing just right in the moment supports while also having a plan how to help the learners become more and more independent.
I agree, Daria. And one of the things to kind of consider that I always kind of consider is we're really trying to reduce errors, right? Like it creates faster, more efficient learning, but it also avoids things like developing patterns of behavior that might influence, for instance, I was driving the first time I drove to my college roommate's house, I went the wrong way. And after that, I could not figure out, I could not go the right way. Like my brain would not allow me. I made that initial error. I knew it was an error, but I didn't know where the error happened. And so I had to have directions every time, like every time I went to see him. And so getting it wrong that first time really influenced the way that I was able to develop the skill of getting there on my own after that. And so with students and learners who are learning new skills and routines or academic content, the more we can do to help prevent those errors or prevent them going kind of down the wrong path in a sequence of actions or behaviors, can help, avoid some of that and help them become more quickly independent or ready to move on to the next thing.
Yeah, and Daniel, I would even go as far as to say sometimes we can accelerate the learning by using prompts. So students can experience the success, they can get reinforced, and they can reinforce the skill in itself. So I think that there is a lot of different uses for prompting, whether it is to help students avoid mistakes or whether it is to accelerate the learning rates for them as well. The
Yeah, and there
important
sorry, I was just going to say there are definitely times where it's really important that we don't practice skills wrong. And Daniel, your example is really great. You know, you went the wrong way, and so you practiced the skill incorrectly, and then it was harder to correct that skill. And there's certainly times where I think discovery and exploration is really important, but there are also certain skills like crossing the street. We don't want to practice that wrong. We want to practice that right and do it right every single time. And so, allowing basically those patterns of behavior to be incorrect is not going to help that student. And in fact, it's probably going to make it take longer, to Daria's point, to learn the correct way to do it.
the important part about the prompting, or at least one of the important parts, is to make sure we have a plan, however, as to what prompt we're providing and what is the plan, how to fade it, right? Because we want eventually the student, to Selena's point, the student who is crossing the road, we want them to eventually cross the road independently and safely. And it's not fantastic to have assistance to cross the road every single time. It might be very appropriate at the beginning while the student is learning, but we want to have a plan how to eventually fade them so that prompts don't become something that students are dependent on, and for the lack of better word, that they don't become crutches for students, right? That we are giving them the support that they need, not necessarily the support that they might want sometimes.
So I think that brings us into our prompting hierarchy. And so there are some prompts that are more intrusive, and there are some prompts that are not as intrusive. And there's some disagreement about where everything falls on that list. But at the end of the day, we want to think about, is it really important that we use a lot of prompting to help that student learn that skill and then fade it out? Or is it more appropriate for us to use a little bit of prompting to help them to be successful up to the point they need it? So we're not being over intrusive. And Daria, I love your Goldilocks comparison. The idea of not too much, but not too little, and meeting students where they need in order for them to be successful. Because what we want to do is then say, well, now you're being successful, so you don't need as much support. Let's pull away a little bit so that you can be successful with less support. Or more independent supports. Because the other thing I think about is sometimes we don't have to completely fade all the supports and prompts. Sometimes we can leave them in if that person is controlling them themselves. So, for example, I have lots of prompts in my daily life. I have my to-do list, I have my calendar, I have all sorts of things that remind me of the things that I need to do so I don't forget to do them. Those are prompts, but they're prompts that I control and I direct. And so I don't need another person to do that for me, which is perfectly appropriate and I actually think very functional for most people. But we don't always start right there. Sometimes we have to teach those skills, and prompts can be really helpful as a teaching tool.
And to the point that Daria brought up earlier about the independence and finding the right one, and to your point, Selena, about kind of that idea of we all use prompts, I think it is important to think about when we are teaching a student a skill that we really consider what prompts other people have that sort of exist in the world and how we use anything that we're adding, whether we're using a gesture or a model prompt or a verb, like whatever prompt we're using, that it's directing and paired with those things that exist already, right? Like it's Whether it's sequencing a series of events of getting dressed or putting your coat on, we might use a visual schedule, but we also want to point students to the things that are the prompt for the next thing or the cue for the next thing. So when my left arm is in, that lets me know my right arm, right? Like there's all these different things that kind of change in the world that if we can point students and kids who are learning these skills to those salient things that live in the environment, then we can more effectively kind of fade out that additional human support and allow them to rely on the things that already kind of exist or something that they can use like a schedule or a checklist or something of that nature to help them through it,
Yeah, I
or
think
anchor charts
about
on the wall, right? Like
right. That's what I was going to
those
say. So
kinds
I
of
think
things.
about our printer at work, right? When it when it's not behaving appropriately, there is actually a list on our wall of how to deal with the potential problems that are going on. And if you do them in the order that's on the wall, you're more likely to be a little more successful in making the printer do what it is intended to do than if you just kind of start problem solving. The good news is that is always going to be there. So that during the teaching phase, the prompt may have to be, hey, look at what's in your environment to help you, right? Do you see the checklist on the wall? Let's try that. And then fading that to, hey, what do you think we should be looking for right now? So that we can start fading the human prompt. But the good news is there is a prompt that's going to be there forever and always because that printer will always break and it will always have to be dealt with time and time again.
You can also look at things like what are other people doing, right? So we're trying to learn a new routine, or we're trying to learn sort of the social expectations of a new activity or experience or whatever. And we might build in some prompts there, but it might be finding out what other people are doing. If you go to a new restaurant and there's a line, like you're one of those fast casual restaurants, watching someone go through the line and sort of following that sequence can be really helpful. But if you haven't learned to do that, it might not come naturally. So we might prompt someone not only to go through the line and make an order, but also this might look a little different. So how am I learning from the people around me?
I also suspect that a lot of teachers are already using prompting and using many different prompts in the classroom. I think the classic teacher look, right, really is a gestural prompt to redirect some behaviors in the students. And so, one invitation that I would give to our listeners is to look at their practices and look at which prompts are they using when, and look at it a bit critically and think about what can we start fading. Because if we are experiencing our students consistently asking the same questions, or if we are seeing students develop a bit of learned helplessness, it's a great opportunity to kind of reflect on our practices and figure out, have we conditioned our students to rely on prompts that maybe we didn't necessarily intend to. And so looking at what we are already doing and figuring out, is there room to make less intrusive points, less intensive points, or prompts, or more so, is a good consideration.
That's such a good point. One of the things I see a lot in classrooms, especially when they're either a co-taught classroom or an IA is helping to support a student with an activity or in the classroom, is that back to kind of Selena's point, this isn't an instruction or direction. That there's a teacher that's giving a direction to the whole class, and then that gets repeated by the student by another person telling the student, right? And so it's this the student in that point is kind of learning. I wait for this other person to tell me. What we might want to look at is how does that person help the student attend to the initial directive of the teacher, and how's the teacher modifying that directive in a way that is capturing the attention, right? It's sort of that idea of I'm saying it, but what are my other cues that are going to draw everybody in? Do we flick the lights? Do we ring a bell? What are these little things that we can work on so that more and more students are attending to that original thing? And then if and when the student needs additional support, doing it in a way that reduces the reliance on another person, and really sort of being thoughtful about that. And what we want that final kind of behavior. Daria, you mentioned kind of having a plan for it. That plan requires knowing what you want it to look like at the end. So being really clear about this student will follow directions when given to the whole class, right? Like that's the idea. That's what we're looking for. And that's what we can plan and fade our prompting to move towards.
All right. I think this has been a really good conversation about prompting and the need to really be thoughtful and purposeful with the prompting and how we do it.
So, Selena, does that mean you're prompting us to talk about our resource?
I am prompting us to talk about our resource, and specifically, I am prompting Daniel to talk about our resource today. So, Daniel, I will hand it off to you.
Hey, thanks so much. I'm really excited about this resource because it provides a good, just kind of overview of using a system of prompts. We talked a little bit about kind of the idea of a plan for using prompts and fading them. This one comes from the Center on Transition, through the RRTC. And it's a one pager that just sort of outlines different types of prompts, but also when to use them, how to fade them. Um, Making sure that students have a chance to practice independently, um, and modeling a da 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 da. So it's a kind of a checklist that helps you with recording your level of prompt, kind of moving through that system so that we're clear about what finding that what do we call it, the Goldilocks, the baby bear level of prompting that a student needs, and just being really consistent about when and how we're providing them to move towards student independence.
Great. And we will make sure to link that in the show notes. So if you're interested in it, you can find it very easily. All right. Well, that brings us to the end of our episode today. Daria, thank you so much for your wisdom and insight.
Thanks so much for being here. And I wanted to extend an invitation to our listeners that should there be any questions or any topics they would love to hear us talk about, we would absolutely love to hear from them.
Absolutely. And our contact information is also in the show notes. So please feel free to reach out to us with, whatever comments or thoughts you may have. Daniel, as always, thank you for your wisdom and input.
Hey, thanks for having me. I am not accepting feedback at this time. I'm just kidding. Please, we want to talk about stuff, so let us know.
Yes, as always. And then thank you, Emily, for your overarching wisdom to move us forward.
My pleasure.
And to our listeners, we invite you to join us on our next episode.
Thanks for listening to Education Insights Focus on Behavior. We hope you enjoyed the conversation, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. You can join the conversation by emailing us at cbis@odu.edu, visiting www.cbisva.org, or following us on Facebook, Instagram, X, or Blue Sky at CBISVA. Special thanks to the Virginia Department of Education for their support of this project.